Alright, so I'm just doing a quick demo POV casting shot of the Echo Boost Beach. This is the 9-weight. I've got a couple of gotcha clousers tied on my line here with droppers. This is the Rio outbound short shooting head, the 9-weight, so it's 375 grains. And then I've got that connected to some Rio metered running line. And basically, when I cast this, I bring it, I strip it all the way in, you know, like all the way almost to the leader. And then to get the line back out, you just do kind of a couple of sweeps and some forward false casts or roll casts or whatever, just to get the line out. And then you just do a roll cast forward, pick up the line behind you, shoot it back out. It's a lot easier when there's no headwinds like there are today, but we'll do our best. There's a initial roll cast. Sometimes I struggle with that. Okay, there we go. Back, forward. And there we go. And then I just shot out about, I don't know, that was a good 60-foot cast, so with pretty much no effort. When I really get dialed in and focused and I have a headwind or a tailwind at my back, I can get some nice 100-foot casts, but most of the time I can do consistently like 80 feet, which is not bad. So it's not going to cast any further than like a single-handed rod, to be honest with you, but it does take off some of the fatigue that you get with, you know, casting a one-handed 9-weight rod. Just because, you know, you're not putting so much strain on one hand, you kind of distribute that casting, you know, movement across, you know, two hands. So I like it. It's a fun rod to fish, and we're out here in Connecticut at Hammonasset State Park, and let's see if we can get anything. It's mid-March, so I'm not expecting a ton, but I may switch to a sinking line here soon and see if we can get some porgies or something if they're around. But whoop, tripping on a rock. Alright, this is a review of the Echo Boost Beach two-handed fly rod. Wanted to do a review of this rod for a while, just especially since it seems to be kind of a mystery rod on the internet. Not a lot of people use it, and those who do don't really seem to have shared much about it. So this one here is the 9-weight 12-foot 2-inch model. And I've been fishing this rod for about 2 years here in Connecticut on the Long Island Sound. This rod is really designed to give you some advantages over single-handed rods. Casting a 9-weight or a 10-weight single-handed rod all day can be very fatiguing, especially on your shoulder. You know, since you have a two-handed grip on this rod, you don't really have, you don't have to put such a tight grip on the rod like you would with a single-handed, when you're double hauling your rod, especially in the wind and things like that. So also, since it's 12 feet long, you get a height advantage, which is beneficial if you're wading in the surf. It also keeps the line up above you, off the ground, just avoids obstacles that might be behind you on the beach. It's a little easier to avoid getting snagged on things behind you. And you get some marginal extra casting distance with this. I wouldn't say it casts much farther than a single-handed rod. In fact, I'd say that it casts about the same as any other, 9-weight single-hander, but it does make it easier to achieve those distances. So just because you're spreading the torque
that you put on the rod, between both of your arms instead of just, the grip of your one hand. So, and that translates into, not getting as tired out. And I've definitely noticed that I'm way less tired after, 4 to 5 hours of casting this thing as opposed to my single-handed rods. So there's that. As far as lines go, this rod takes a wide range of lines. Depending on the situation, I've lined it with some Rio metered running line, which is the orange line that I have on this reel. And then I switch out the shooting heads based on what the conditions are. So I've found that in most windless conditions, it casts the Rio outbound short 30-foot shooting head. And I usually put the 9-weight on here, which is a 375 grain line. And I cast both the floating and the full intermediate sink, depending on what tide, what kind of water I'm fishing. And it casts pretty much any striper fly that you can throw out there. But I've caught flounder on this, I've caught mackerel on this, I've caught porgies. You can do a lot with it. When conditions get really windy, I actually swap out the Rio shooting heads and put on some Skagit heads. And this is kind of an unconventional way of fishing, but I have a 500 grain Scientific Anglers intermediate Skagit head, which is a 20-foot long head. It's actually the line I have on the reel right now. And then I'll also I have a 500 grain Rio Skagit Max Launch shooting head, or not shooting head, Skagit head, I should say. And that one's 23 feet long. So, the Skagit head is kind of like having a weight on the end of your line. And it really shoots the shooting line out there. So it's kind of a fun way to fish. And I actually cast these without a tip. I'll just loop on some 40-pound fluorocarbon and build my leader off of that. And I've found it does really help in high winds. They are Skagit heads, which means that they're meant to have a tip put on them for spay casting, which I've tried doing. And when I put the tip on, I find it overloads the rod a little too much. So I think the upper end of this rod for grain weight is like around 400. So, you don't want to go too far above that, or you start having trouble getting your cast out there. But if I was going to put a tip on mine, I might as well just switch back to the OBS heads. So, just having that short, heavy head will cut through the wind a little bit better than, the longer Rio outbound short heads do. So the only downside of that is it's not a very clean cast. Because they're such heavy lines, they just they tend to splash down really hard. And so, I really only do that when it's like choppy conditions and I'm not really worried about my my cast spooking the fish. So, but it's a good system, and I carry all the lines with me, in a leader wallet kind of thing. And, they're pretty easy to change out, and it takes up very little space in my pack. So I like the system. As for fighting the fish, I've heard a few people say that they think a 12-foot rod would make landing fish very hard. I will just say I've never had that problem before, and especially since this rod has such a flexible tip section, you can actually bring the fish in pretty close, like close enough to lip a striper, so but some pros of the rod, makes casting a little bit easier, less fatiguing, keeps the line high above you on your back cast, helps you get over the waves a little better on your forward cast. The cork is nice, the reel seat is nice, it's a well-constructed rod. I think it's worth the money, so it's a good rod. My only cons to this rod is I think the tip section is too soft. That's one thing I would change. I would make this rod a little bit stiffer. It is a fast action rod. I'd call it more of a medium fast. And that, that tip section, when you have a headwind, it just gets overloaded way too easily. And that's why I switched to those Skagit heads, because it's just, like I said, it's like putting a weight on a line and throwing it out there. So that's really the only thing I would change. And then the other con to this is there's definitely a learning curve to casting two-handed rods. These are not spay casting rods, they are overhead casting rods. And it takes a little bit of practice to get it right. But once you do, It's very easy. It's very, enjoyable. And I definitely think it's worth having one of these, at least trying it and see if you like it. It's not going to make you cast farther than a single-handed rod, but it will make, I think, your time a little more easier on the water in certain ways. So